This is Krista. Welcome back to Made to Be Whole and part 2 of our discussion on diabetes as we take a deeper dive into intermittent fasting with Chef Brian Wyles. Stay tuned. Made to Be Whole is intended for informational purposes only. It's not intended to replace the advice or care of a licensed healthcare professional. Participating in this podcast does not constitute a provider-patient relationship with Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, or any of the guests featured on Made to Be Whole. Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, and any featured guests aren't responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from use of information obtained in this podcast or associated materials. Please consult a healthcare professional for any health-related concerns that you are experiencing. All right, welcome back. You've had a week to chew on our overview of diabetes, a little teaser about intermittent fasting. So today we're going to talk to Chef Brian Wyles, who I have known since he was in the womb and whose mom is my college BFF who produces this podcast. He was pretty recently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and miraculously reversed it in a short period of time using intermittent fasting and the principles from Dr. Fung's book, which we reviewed last week. He's the head chef at Red Square Euro Bistro. He brings 10 plus years in the food world, from fine dining to kitchen deep cleaning, and he is also the founder of Delta Do Hemp, combining a love of chemistry and hemp to create great tasting, highly effective CBD supplements. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Krista. And good to see you again.
So tell us a little bit about the diabetes journey, when you were diagnosed, but also when in retrospect you think you started feeling crappy and didn't realize that was what was going on.
Years before I got diagnosed is when I started feeling crappy. The dramatic shift in symptoms after I started making different choices in my diet and different choices in my life, and recognizing like how long those symptoms had essentially been trailing. So I work in the food industry. And as I'm sure you know, cooks, line cooks, and chefs, they are all known for their great and impeccable health. We're talking like, so the second I basically joined the food industry, I started sucking down a pack at a half a day. I was sucking down a watered down soda and Powerade. I did water it down because I still had some sense, but that soda definitely was like the main driving force behind it. My drinking habits in the last 4 years exploded exponentially. My soda habits have been very consistent for the last 10 years since I hit the food industry as my main career. And a big portion of my diet while I was on the line was either consistently eating and also having a high amounts of sugar-laden stuff like gummy bears and gummy worms and, small candies and stuff. Now, that's all bad for diabetes. And it's not just the high levels of sugar that I was intaking. It was also the consistency in which I was eating and never giving my body a break. Now, I tried intermittent fasting back in 2018, 2019, and it was something I could stick to for a couple of weeks. I definitely saw some benefits to it. But my intermittent fasting was always about a 16 to 20 hour window. And it was a very strict fast because I don't like to do things halfway. So in that 16-hour window, it would be just water and no protein, no carbohydrates, no fat, no macros, no micros, nothing like that. And I saw a lot of benefit from intermittent fasting, especially when I was at work, because fun fact, the hungrier you are, the more sensitive your nose is.
You had kind of a
major
shift.
I had a suspicion that I was going diabetic, but I didn't want to really, deal with it. I had an instinct, but if I had figured it out, then I wouldn't have needed the diagnosis in the first place. What really happened is my vision. So before this, for the last couple of years, my fatigue, symptoms of depression had been really setting in, and I was thinking dumber. And not from like a dumber place where it's like, oh, that was a bad decision, but it's like, oh, the last 3 months of decisions I've made in this sudden moment of clarity have been all garbage in like and it's not even like a dumbness where it's like progressively dumber or anything like that. It's just like this miasma of lowered intelligence and self-awareness. I'm a huge game player. I was playing these online multiplayer games with my friends that require you to have a brain that's on point with good decision making and like complicated teamwork. And I've got a pretty good brain for that stuff. I've got a pretty tactical brain. And for the last 2.5 years, I just thought that, "Oh, I'm finally getting too old for this. I can't go out there playing multiplayer games anymore."
What and tell people how old you are?
I'm 29 years old.
Okay, okay, okay.
Uh,
So that probably wasn't it. Proceed.
yeah, listen, I'm getting up there in age. These Fortnite kids are killing me, okay?
Alright, so
So,
when you figured this out, it was
yeah.
what was your blood sugar level and your A1C when you finally got the diagnosis?
Well, so just before I got the diagnosis, I had the dumb brain, and then my vision went awful for 4 weeks. So for a whole
Okay.
month, I couldn't see, and it wasn't like I could focus it. It's like anything near, anything far away, anything inside of my eye, couldn't see any of it, right? Vision was crap. I went in to go see the vision doctor. They told me to go check it out for diabetes. We went in and got the blood work. My A1C was 12.9. And a
Which is very
A1C.
high.
Yes. So, an average blood sugar level of a fasting glucose level, that your liver is moderating and that you're like not doing an extended fast, just like you haven't eaten for a couple hours, should be about 100 milligrams per deciliter, or about 1 gram of sugar per 100 milliliters of blood. So a A1C that translates to about A1C of about 5.4 or 5.2, somewhere around there. Both those numbers are healthy. The A1C of 12.9, which measures your average glucose over 3 months, that is on your red blood cells. That's what the A1C is doing right there, because your red blood cells refresh every 3 months. So it's a great biomarker right there. That meant that over the average of that 3 months, my blood glucose was 370 milligrams per deciliter, or 3.7 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters of blood, which
And
is a
that's on
lot
average. That's on average,
on
so that means there are
average.
times it was
I was
higher. Mhm.
above that. When I got my first glucose reading, I was at 394. And I bet you I broke 400 more than a couple of times in
Sure.
that last 3 months, more so even in that last 2 years of being hella diabetic and not understanding it. So,
What was your
that was
emotional
scary.
reaction yeah, what was your emotional reaction to that, realizing, "Oh, I'm diabetic and I'm very diabetic?"
Well, I'm 29 years old, and half the reason why I took on a cooking job is because I believed that it would help me be active enough to maintain a certain level of health, a baseline level of health. And, it sounds silly now when I say like how unhealthy line cooks are, but a lot of that is just the culture. There's actually a lot of stuff like, you're using your brain to solve complex problems. You're using your body to carry stuff. You're dealing with weights and things. You're dealing with a very complicated environment. Like there's a lot
It's not a
there that you
desk
can.
job.
It
Right,
is not a
right.
desk job. I am standing up 10 to 12 hours a day. And so long as I'm making sure I'm wearing the proper shoes, and I'm keeping like a healthy level of maintenance on that, it's actually not the worst thing. You have a little bit of protein, you're good to go. Like you keep on repairing your calf muscles. But I so when I got because I knew that like health problems ran in my family. My father, right after I was born, ballooned up excessively. And I remember my mom telling me the story that, like, when I grow up, I want to be like my dad and I want to be fat. And and I don't know if that gave me a complex or dysphoria when I was younger, but basically, I've never gone past a specific weight. And I've always, like, I took weights class in high school. I did all this stuff that, like, gave me a strong foundation, gave me solid muscle mass to start out with. And then I did cooking, and cooking was a really nice one. And then I find out I had this diagnosis, and it's like a slap in the face. It's like, oh, I guess standing up all day doesn't counteract all of the, millions of liters of soda and about 16 bottles of vodka in a given year. I actually avoided agave sweetener growing up
Okay.
because I read an article when I was 16 or 17 years old that fructose is processed in the body the same way as alcohol is. And both alcohol and fructose, ethanol and fructose, get turned into fat that gets stored in the liver that then cannot be accessed unless you're fasting. It's the last freaking like bounty of energy that your body is holding on to, because it's also assuming that you're not going to be like making fat stores in that area in your liver as like at great a rate than you would be in your subcutaneous fat over here, the fat that's just under your skin, because you got your
Mhm.
subcutaneous fat and you got your visceral fat. Visceral fat is your organ fat. You need a little bit of that, as I understand it, just for insulation and padding, because you need fat somewhere in your body, but you don't want a lot of it, because that's where it gets all that congestion and clogging that we're talking about in that last episode right there. Your
Which
body's
is why
trying to
somebody
hold.
can be yeah, which is why somebody can be not overweight but still have a serious problem
Yep.
with visceral fat. You can be skinny fat.
They call me a
Ding, ding,
lean
ding.
diabetic.
There you go.
Yeah, they call me. I looked. I was like, Doc, how can it be this freaking high? I looked at
Mm.
my waistline like I'm not crazy. And he's like, no, not on the outside, but it's on the inside. That's what counts right there. That's where your real beauty shines. You got enough fat in there to make a bar of soap and have extra left over. Like, you're good to go.
What did you do after you got diagnosed?
I followed all the recommended doctor stuff. I started taking metformin. I started paying attention to my meals. I started eating smaller meals more frequently. I still had carbohydrates in there. I was emotionally and physically devastated because of all the changes and also trying to manage stuff. The stress of it all was just, I would say, incalculable, right? And I thought in the first 2 weeks after I got diagnosed, I said to my mother, I said, "Listen, I hope that I hope that it's type 2, because we got the blood work back and stuff, but they also wanted to see if the metformin was working. So 95% sure it's type 2, but we'll see after the next blood test, right? Because if it is type 2, I might be able to just fast my way out of this." So I knew that that was an option, but the thing is that even though I might be a rare person in this, but even if I have a hypothesis on how something works, I don't actually think that I'm right until I find some evidence for it or until I try it out. And everybody in my life was telling me, be careful. Don't try fasting your way out of this yet. Just do what the doctor is saying. And then a few months after literally 2 months after I got the diagnosis, my mom's friend and also someone who's known me for a long time, Carmel, who's basically my adopted aunt in a way, she turned us onto Dr. Fung's book. And I bought it, and then I was out in Utah doing some business out there for the Delta Dew company, and Carmel was out there as well. I was crashing with her, and she told me about the book. She told me about some people's success stories. I'm a deeply cynical and deeply not cynical. What was it? Where you're like
Gosh,
cautiously, yeah. Just like I I,
you're
I
analytical
wasn't
and
gonna be
deliberate. Yes.
I, I wasn't gonna be like nothing is gonna be a cure all. This is a broken metabolic state inside of my body, and everybody says it can't be cured, it can't be reversed. I'm gonna have to be paying attention to my diet for the rest of my life. I'm gonna be always gonna be more sensitive to this stuff, and it's like, yeah, sure, okay. There's this fasting thing. It was 2 months after I got my first diagnosis for 12.9. 3 months after I got my diagnosis from 12.9, and I got my blood work back after my 3 months, my A1C had gone from 12.9 to 6.2.
It's amazing.
And it was
Which to let people know,
amazing.
that's not in the diabetic range even. That's in the pre-diabetic range, but that's not
Hmm.
diabetic. That is
Yeah,
not diabetic. Yeah.
6.2. And the thing is I'm extremely lucky. Okay. Because when I did those fasts, it was 4 or 5 36-hour fasts. that I did, 30 to 36 hours. I wasn't even strict about the timing. I just made sure I got past 24, and then how much further I could go past that, I did. And when I did those fasts, I did them basically every 3 or 4 days. I was keeping to the diet of basically just cheese and nuts and protein and vegetables. When I had carbohydrates, I binged on carbohydrates when I was doing it because I don't have any self-control. So it was either all off or all on. But I was also fasting when I was working, which meant that my caloric use was higher. So I did some math here. A 36-hour fast is optimal for me because it is the maximum amount of time I have before my nutrient levels sink so low that my body wants to gorge on stuff to try and replace those nutrients. So, and that's a big part of why fasting can be a very difficult thing for people is because your body is literally telling you that like, hey, if you don't have nutrients in here, that's going to suck. But after you hit that first initial hump of hunger and move past it, that next hump of hunger, which happens in about the 18 to 24-hour mark, you move past that and you won't feel crazy again. You won't feel that freaking hunger hit you until your nutrients start to lower. And that's a hypothesis here. But every time I've hit that mark again at 36 and I supplement it with some almonds and a little bit of emergency to help because you need that bioavailability, you want something for those nutrients to kind of piggyback on, a little bit of almonds, some cheese, and then like a glass of emergency. And then I can go for another 12 hours and I don't have any headache, I don't have any fatigue, and I don't have that hankering for the carbohydrates. I have hankering for food. But the thing is like what was so amazing to me because I'm saying all of this just to say that these are the specific contexts I was working with. That
Right.
this that the fasting thing is unique to each person. This is what worked for me. If you are going to try fasting, and please don't do it if you are type 1 and you haven't talked to your doctor because there's a lot of stuff there that I don't know about that. This is all pertaining to type 2 and just my personal experience with it. There's all these different contexts, all this different stuff going on. So, like, my insulin, my pancreas probably wasn't as damaged as other people's might have been in certain capacities. Like, I'm just trying to really capture
Right.
the sheer complexity of how many elements came together and how well fasting works for me because of my personal situation. If your pancreas is destroyed,
Right.
then then we have no idea to what extent fasting might impact you because you probably need more insulin help. And then there's going to be other factors for that person to consider. But
The patch you said before you just did water and now you figured out kind of a smarter way to do it. You mentioned the almonds and the emergency. What constitutes a fast for you?
so as I understand it, the fasting fuel source, right? Your body has two fuel source. It has the immediate fuel source and it has the long-term fuel source. We culturally have acknowledged that our fat stores are actually there for the times when we didn't have meals consistently. Before farming happened, you'd think about it. You'd go out, you'd hunt, you wouldn't have a way to store the animal outside of yourself because, we hadn't invented curing meats, we hadn't invented a whole bunch of stuff. But if you go out, you kill something, you put it on the fire, you eat and eat and eat and eat until you can't eat anymore, and then you're done. And then all of that food, all of that fat, and all that protein, and then whatever veggies and whatever carbs you can find out there as a hunter gatherer gets stored in your body. And then it might be weeks until you see your next big meal, but your body doesn't care because you just spent 4 days packing on as many pounds as possible to carry it with you.
Right.
So it makes total sense to me that I would be packing on fat stores and then not eating for weeks at a time if I was in that kind of environment, or maybe just days. Like there's, I don't know the financials or economics of caveman consumption. Okay,
Right.
what I do know is that for me, I can't go past 36 hours without feeling like I'm going insane. I did those 4 or 5 fasts in that first month, that the first 3 months, that A1C. I was very strict about my diet in that first 3 months. I didn't binge on gummy bears in that first few months. I did binge afterwards once I saw my A1C drop so much, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Hallelujah." But when I did binge, it was like I ate a crap load of food, after not eating, but because I did a fast that was long enough, I was still chipping away at that internal fat store. I did some math, okay? My resting metabolic rate is about 2,000-ish calories, all right? It's a pretty
Okay.
average intake. It's about, 2,000-ish calories to keep homeostasis going and to just chill out. That's how many calories I consume in one single day to keep this body going without exercise, right? With exercise, it's probably closer to 2,500. Um, a single pound of fat is 3,500 calories. So if you hit the 24-hour fast, which is when it starts to do truly fat burning stuff because your body is moving away from its glucose stores, it's started to burn those out and moving towards it's burning out all of the stored glycogen in the liver, and it's starting to use all of the stored glucose in the skeletal muscles. And then you move on to it, and it's like, okay, your body switches over to ketones. Any excess glucose that's in the body is going straight to the brain because the brain requires glucose for very important, very specific functions, but the rest of the body does not. The rest of the body
Right.
can use ketones to create ATP. What that means is that in that in that 36-hour fast, I can burn off just by resting a third of a pound of fuel because that's going to be about 1,000 to 1,200 calories. And every time I did that, if I do that 3 times, I'm burning off a pound of fat internally, not
Right.
just subcutaneously, not just under the skin, but in the organs as well. And I saw such a dramatic shift in my energy levels. I saw a dramatic shift in my mental acuity. My friends wanted to play video games with me again because I was suddenly doing so much better.
How often you need to fast at this point? What's your maintenance pattern? Are you still figuring that out?
So right now my maintenance pattern is the last 2 weeks I've just kind of been eating and drinking what I want to. I have permanently cut out soda. Like that's gone. Soda's gone forever. Don't drink soda. It's bad. It's bad. Okay. If you do drink it, water it down and treat it like alcohol because it is just as bad for you as alcohol is. Also, I've almost completely cut out alcohol. I work at a bar, so I do have a drink occasionally with them. So what I'm trying to say is I'm not being terrifically strict in certain capacities, but then there are other ways in which I am being extremely strict. And the way I figure out first of all, when I figure out what a fast is, you can have a strict fast. A strict fast is literally just water.
Okay.
And you can have it with nutrients too. So after say I would say that if people are trying to do extended fast, like if you're sitting there and you're like, I'm going to do this for 5 days, it's like, first of all, excellent goal. Good on you. And for the love of Pete, don't feel like that if you feel bad, that it's working. Fasting doesn't actually feel bad. It only feels bad when you feel hungry as heck, and that lasts for about an hour. All right.
Okay.
The hungry commercial from Snickers and stuff. You're not you
Right.
when you're hungry. Yeah, you're not you when you're hungry, but you're only hungry if you don't have any fuel. So that
Okay.
transition from the glucose fuel to your internal body fat fuel, I actually feel full,
Okay.
and I feel really full. I still feel a little empty because my body has those habits. It has those patterns.
Sure.
It's like I want to go and I want to eat this thing. It's a morning thing, or it's a ritual. It's all of these different things that are societally and internally enforced. Of like, we have breakfast when we wake up. We have lunch with our friends. We go out and have drinks with our friends. We do all this stuff. So fasting is not just this battle with your body. It's a conversation with the rest of society in which you're not participating in these very fundamental, very human, very delightful activities for the sake of your health. And I cannot stress how much that made me feel isolated and alone when people were eating and I was actively not eating with them out of
Right.
a sense of duty to myself and how I knew that was helping me. And it's so exhausting. So
Right.
I'm not saying that fasting is easy even just on the food level. It's exhausting because you are constantly fighting against all of these baseline human
Social,
things,
emotional. Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
it's all connected too. That's why, like, Dr. Fung says in the book, any kind of fasting you can do. is good because you're giving your metabolic state a break, right?
Right. Right.
So for me, I'm an all in, all out kind of guy, which means I need to do it in an extreme way, which is one of the reasons why I was able to bring my A1C down so freaking quickly to the point that it actually caused me diabetic induced or treatment induced neuropathy, which is what happens if you bring your sugars down too fast. That's also bad. All right.
Right.
I'm young. I felt like I could bring them down pretty quick, and I still have like floaters in my eyes from the damage I did bringing it down, not just having it raised. It's
Right.
really weird. When we're talking about fast, first of all, the fast that works best for you is the one that's going to work best, period. For me, that's a 36-hour fast, 24 to 36 hours. And that's because that is what I can commit to. It's something I can do consistently, and it's something that has shown me great benefits. Here's the thing, you don't have to do strict fasts. You don't. You don't. For me, if I start eating, then I just want to keep on eating. So I have to start the day not eating so that I can keep that pattern going. But if you're the type of person who can not eat for 24 hours and then have a handful of almonds, some cheese, and some meat, and then not to continue to eat consistently after that, but just have a little bump where you can get some nutrition in the middle of it, that's also a fast because fasting is just ketosis. It's
Right.
it's
Right.
ketosis without, but instead of adding fuel from the outside in the form of fat and protein, it's about ketosis using only the internal fuel source you've built up over years and years of eating.
Right.
So, there's nothing wrong with eating during a fast. People are gonna be like, "Oh, technically anything you eat is breaking a fast." Yeah, but it isn't breaking the mechanism that's actually helping you.
Excellent.
Ketosis is the mechanism, and ketosis can be a dangerous mechanism for some people. But the thing is, it's not like you have to be terribly strict in order to see benefits. It's just that you have to be thoughtful and conscious. So,
Right.
like, the thing is, if I go 36 hours without eating, right, I'm burning off whatever amount of fat I feel like I've calculated an estimated amount right there. And then I go back on it. That next day, I'm going to be binging, but I'm still coming out ahead because my body is using some of that binging fuel as immediate fuel, and it's not
Right.
immediately packing it away. It's a two steps forward, one step back situation for me. And because
Right.
I also did fasting while I was working and being in an active state, that helped it
Mhm.
out as well. So if you can figure out a way to be fasting and be active at the same time, you're talking about the growth hormone. You're talking about all this stuff right here. Your body is actually built to fast and operate on itself, but you have to give it activity to make sure that it's stimulated enough to know that it needs to keep its muscle mass, to know that it needs to keep its energy going. If you're just sitting around and fasting, it's certainly better than nothing, but that's also where we're talking like people wasting away or people like having
Right.
muscle degradation and such. Like it feels counterintuitive, but going for a really long walk and like carrying a couple of things while you're fasting is actually going to be better for you than just acting bedridden because you can't focus on anything but how empty your belly feels, you know?
And
And I do feel full when I'm fasting, but it still feels empty because there's all this expectation and my body's like, predisposition and the societal thing. Like it's not easy. Eh, I
right.
I'm not interested in telling people that I didn't like not eat candy or not eat sugar, but I will say that in that first couple of months when I did, I felt more stressed out than I did in my entire life. And now that I have this mechanism that's kind of working for me, I don't anymore.
Right. You don't feel deprived. And it sounds like you've made some
Mhm.
really smart decisions about knowing what has to go. You know, the soda's out. You've got to really moderate the alcohol and but I like that you gave yourself grace for that growth process. At the
Yeah,
beginning,
you
it's not
have
like,
to.
well, I'm going to quit because I went crazy on my gummy bears. But after your body realizes, oh, this is working, then the in betweens get easier too.
Yeah, well, and I would say that like candies like gummy bears are probably going to be better for you if you are going to have candy, have something that has protein in it because then your belly is going to hurt if you eat too much. Don't
Pixie
eat Fun
sticks.
Dip.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
don't
yeah.
eat Pixie Sticks. Don't eat Fun Dip. It's just straight sugar. At least with gummy bears, you're getting some protein. So your body can't process fructose, right? which means it stores it in the liver but it's not using it as energy. So people say they have room for dessert. You have room
Mhm.
for dessert because you're not taking in any real nutrients. Even if you're having a slice of cake, that half of that's going to be just fructose because of the amount of
Right.
sugar that's in there, right? The other half is going to be glucose. Your body's going to use that for fuel. Your body's going to store that as fat that's under the belly instead of fat
Right.
that's fat that's in your liver. But
Right.
half of the energy that's in that piece of dessert isn't going to get used. Body's like, this is useless. Just throw that in the corner over there. We don't need this right now. If you are going to have candy, have something that has protein in it,
Right.
okay? Or something that has fat in it, all
Right.
right?
Right. Well, another thing I tell people, I just had a conversation with a patient yesterday. I said, even I was just trying to get her to stop eating after dinner. I said, but if emotionally that's hard, say, okay, before I have anything else, if I need a snack, I'm gonna have nuts and an electrolyte drink. And then if I'm still hungry, I can have something else because likely you won't be. And if you do, you're much less likely to overdo it.
Yep.
Much less likely.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
being
almonds
practical.
Almonds specifically have vitamin E. Vitamin E is good for your liver. 2 ounces of almonds gives you 100% of your daily value. When they say daily value, what it means isn't like you can't just eat like 6 pounds of almonds and expect your body to get better because your body can only use so much stuff in a period of time. Like when I was a gym rat, and I had this friend, and he and I did this stuff. We researched religiously how to maximize everything. And the workouts that we settled on were something called circuits. We would have 30 grams of protein after every circuit because that's how much protein your body can process before it turns it into fat or before it just doesn't process it anymore.
Right.
So, and those were in like easily accessible protein sources like turkey and power bars. We tried to get different types of sources of protein as well to try and like spread out those enzymes because you got 8 essential ones and I guess
Sure.
non-essential ones are somewhere around there. But the whole point of that is when you're taking these nutrients and you're taking all this stuff in, your body only takes care of so much.
Right.
That's why diabetes happens, is if you're having an excess of stuff in your diet and your body is holding on to things because it still thinks that we don't know when our next meal is,
Right.
that's the real luxury of society. That's the real luxury of modern day living. It isn't just knowing that we can find a meal. I mean, I know there are people out there who aren't in that situation, but like more than
Largely in our
ever.
American culture, sure. Ho how helpful was it to have a family member, your mom, who was, like, on board too and joined you a little bit in that journey? Is it helpful to have a support person who gets it and is playing along?
I trying to navigate this. It was super helpful to have somebody who was so supportive and who was so ready to make the house diabetic friendly, to help me find certain snacks and to help me find certain processes and different like methods of like trying to figure out how we eat and how we eat together. It was incredibly helpful. It was a little unhelpful because of how powerful her concern was that trying things was sometimes met with a massive amount of skepticism, and I love her for it, I really do, but those 3 months are 3 months I would have rather never had happen in the first place, if at all. Was
Right.
it was so stressful for the both of us. It
Yeah.
was so bad. I started reading diabetic forums, I started
Oh,
reading up,
wow.
type 1, type 2, and all that jazz, and, like, there are so many people out there who feel so alone
Right.
and lonely, and it's one of those diseases that's invisible, not because it isn't common, but because nobody really wants to, like, talk about it. You you
And
get
invite the
to
judgment of the people around them because as soon as you say you're diabetic, everybody's gonna tell you what you can and can't do or a
exactly.
story, but
People feel like they can tell you what to
when
do
you're
with
under.
your body. It's a status thing almost.
Yeah,
That whole
right.
moral conundrum of, "Oh, you got diabetes. You must be making bad choices.
Right.
You must be a bad person. And,
Right.
it's that same mentality of like, oh, you're fat, so you're lesser than me. So
Right.
I can treat you like somebody I can boss around. It's generally disgusting behavior that comes from strangers and sometimes even friends who, friends usually mean well. Strangers are
Right.
usually insecure, and
Right.
close family is terrified.
Well, I just think
And
it's beautiful to have because I've seen so many people, family worries, so they become experts and lecture you about what to do, but they don't actually change what they're doing either.
uh
And
no,
having that
she
support of like, "Hey, I'm walking this with you," that's pretty
mhm.
awesome.
No, that's the thing is that, like, my mom was the one who gave me my integrity, you know? That's why I can sit here and tell you, that, like, I didn't do it perfectly and it still helped me out. I
Right.
found that there are a lot of people who are diabetic and they say that they've changed their diet, but actually what they've done is they focus about 18 hours of their day where they have changed their diet, then there's the 6 hours over here where they don't actually know what they did, but there's some sugar on the corner of their lips, and there's wrappers everywhere on the bed, and, like, I get it. Folks, I do. They
Yeah.
it's why, like, the fasting thing is so hard because, like, you're trying to run contrary to your body's instincts that have been honed for millions of years,
Right.
and to find food, to eat food, and to keep itself safe. You're actively making your body feel like you're putting it in danger when you're surrounded by food. You're surrounded by a bounty, a wealth of things, and you're telling yourself you can't have it. And that is
Right.
so hard to reconcile. It's so hard to keep it going consistently.
It sounds like, along with the support, your analytical brain was a real blessing in navigating this because you're able to tell yourself, okay, this is what's happening to my liver right now. This is what's reversing in my body, and to understand the process and get past those emotions because you get what's going on and how it's going to benefit you. That's pretty
Sure.
cool.
Yeah, because I'm a cook, I'm a chef, like, I have to think about food from every conceivable, perspective because food is embedded into every culture that's on the
Sure.
planet. So, I have to think about these kinds of things. It's why if I read an article about a specific kind of food or read an article about how fructose is processed like alcohol, my brain holds on to it because food has always been important to me even before I made it my career. The
Right.
science of it, the chemistry of it, the way that our body interacts with it. These are all things that interested me before and provided a body of knowledge that the second I found out I had this disease, I was able to draw upon. So I didn't just
Right.
have the support of my family, I have the support of somebody who has taught me how to have integrity when it comes to my own decisions. So which was a big part right there. I think the biggest aspect was that because
Sure.
even if I am binging on sugar, I'm not lying to myself about it.
Right. Right.
Then what's the point?
Right. Well, and it's better to do a little bit consistently and to
Yeah,
give yourself that grace. Well, thank you for
a-
sharing your story. I appreciate it very
absolutely.
much. I think it's really helpful for people to know there are real people who do this and make it work. And like you said, you didn't do it perfectly, but it still saved your life, literally.
Literally saved my life, and I would highly recommend that even if you don't have diabetes, that
Hmm.
we live in such a culture of eat, 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 eat constantly
Hmm.
all the time, consume. Guys, just give yourself a break. It feels like you're not because you're hungry, but it just it
You'll
really
be
does
okay.
the second you get past that first initial round of hunger, that's just a hormone. That's just a
Hmm.
hormone telling you that, "Hey, we're running out of glucose here. I'm gonna have to switch to the other fuel source." That's all that intense hunger is telling you. And if you have fat on your body and you have fat in your body, which if you drink soda or you drink alcohol or you eat candy or sugar in any capacity, you have fat in you. You have stores you can burn off. This is a mechanism that is built into every single human being. You can take advantage of it. The only problem is whether or not you have like the nutritional stores available to keep it from being a miserable experience and whether or not you know how to supplement your body's own needs without breaking the ketosis mechanism. So, yeah,
Awesome. Well, thank you very
Thanks for
much for your
having me.
time and your wisdom. And remember, listeners, to have hope because you were made to be whole. Have a podcast question or suggestion? Text or call us on the podcast info line at 330-439-0686. Thank you for spending time with me today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to be notified when new episodes release. And remember, you were made to be whole.